The stagecoach lurched to a violent stop, throwing Violet Preston against the wooden frame hard enough to steal her breath, one hand instinctively wrapping around her swollen belly as gunshots rang through the Nevada desert air. She had known this journey was dangerous, but what choice did she have? Thomas, her husband of barely 2 years, had left 3 months ago to meet with investors in San Francisco, promising to send for her once he secured the funding for their ranch. The letters had stopped coming 6 weeks past, and then the telegram arrived from the marshal's office. Her Thomas had been killed in a saloon fight, a senseless argument over cards that had escalated into violence. Now she was alone, 6 months pregnant, and traveling from Sacramento to what remained of their dream in Rhyolite, Nevada, where Thomas had already purchased land and started building a modest home. The outlaws surrounded the coach like wolves circling wounded prey. Through the small window, Violet counted 5 of them, all with faces wrapped in dark bandanas, rifles pointed at the driver and the guard who had accompanied them. Her fellow passengers, an elderly merchant and a young couple heading to the mining towns, pressed themselves against the seats in terror. "Everyone out. Now." The voice was rough, edged with cruelty that made Violet's blood run cold. She struggled to stand, her pregnancy making every movement awkward and difficult. The young woman beside her, barely older than Violet's own 22 years, was crying softly into her husband's shoulder. The door was yanked open, and rough hands dragged them into the blazing afternoon sun. The Nevada desert stretched endlessly in all directions, nothing but scrub, brush, and distant mountains breaking the monotonous landscape. "Well, well," one of the outlaws drawled, stepping closer to Violet. His eyes, the only visible part of his face, swept over her with an expression that made her skin crawl. "Looks like we got ourselves something interesting here." The stagecoach guard made a move toward his dropped rifle, and the crack of a gunshot split the air. Violet screamed as the guard crumpled to the ground, blood spreading across the dusty earth. The driver raised his hands higher, his face pale as milk. Anyone else feeling heroic? The leader of the gang walked forward, a tall man with broad shoulders and an air of command that the others deferred to. "Strip them of valuables. We take everything." Violet's wedding ring, a simple gold band that Thomas had saved months to afford, was torn from her finger. Her small carpet bag containing everything she owned in the world was rifled through, her few dollars taken along with a silver locket that had belonged to her mother. The other passengers suffered similar treatment, the young bride sobbing as her jewelry disappeared into the outlaws' pockets. "What about them?" one of the gang members asked, gesturing to the passengers with his rifle. "We just leave them here, kill the men," the leader said casually, as if discussing the weather. "We'll take the women, worth good money down in Mexico." Terror unlike anything Violet had ever known coursed through her veins. The young husband stepped in front of his wife, pleading for their lives, but his words were cut short by another gunshot. The bride's screams echoed across the desert as her husband fell. The elderly merchant tried to run, his aged legs carrying him only a few stumbling steps before he too was shot down. Violet couldn't move, couldn't think beyond the roaring in her ears and the weight of her unborn child. This couldn't be happening. This couldn't be how her story ended, alone in the desert with monsters wearing human faces. "Boss, this one's heavy with child," one of the outlaws said, pointing at Violet. "She ain't gonna fetch much." The leader stepped closer, studying Violet with cold calculation. "She'll slow us down." "Leave her. Just leave her. She's seen our faces." "Half our faces," the leader corrected. "And she's dying anyway. Look at her. 6 months pregnant, alone in the desert with no water, no shelter. She'll be dead by nightfall. Saves us a bullet." They dragged the young bride, still screaming and fighting, toward the horses. Violet wanted to help her, wanted to do something, but her legs wouldn't obey. The driver was forced to his knees, and she turned away before the inevitable shot came, unable to witness another death. Then they were gone, riding south with their stolen goods and their captive, leaving Violet alone with 4 dead bodies and a disabled stagecoach. The wheel had been smashed deliberately, ensuring no one could follow quickly. Violet sank to her knees in the dust, her whole body shaking with shock and horror. She was going to die here. The outlaws were right. She had no water beyond the single canteen she managed to retrieve from the coach, no food, no weapon, and no idea how far she was from Rhyolite or any other settlement. The sun beat down mercilessly, and her black mourning dress absorbed the heat like a curse. For several long minutes, Violet allowed herself the luxury of despair. She wept for Thomas, for their unborn child, for the innocent people murdered in front of her, for the young bride dragged off to an unthinkable fate. She wept until her tears dried up in the desert heat, leaving her hollow and exhausted. Then she stood up. She refused to die here. She refused to let her baby die without even drawing breath. Thomas might be gone, their dreams might be shattered, but she was still alive, still fighting. Violet had survived a difficult childhood in Boston, had survived the journey west when so many others succumbed to disease or accident, had survived losing her husband. She would survive this too. The stagecoach offered little salvage. The outlaws had been thorough in their theft. But Violet found another canteen under the driver's seat, half full of water. She found a wool blanket that would serve as protection when the desert temperature plummeted at night. In the boot, she discovered a small sack of dried beans and a tin of crackers that the outlaws had missed. Not much, but enough to buy her another day. Rhyolite lay to the east, the driver had said that morning. They had been perhaps half a day's journey away when the attack happened. If Violet could walk through the evening, rest during the worst heat, and continue at dawn, she might reach the town before her supplies ran out. The alternative was staying with the bodies and hoping another coach came along, but the outlaws might return, and Violet couldn't bear the thought of spending the night among the dead. She fashioned a sling from part of her petticoat, carrying the canteens and food. The blanket she draped over her head and shoulders, creating shade for herself and her unborn child. Then Violet Preston began to walk. The desert was beautiful in its harsh way, all golden sand and twisted sage, but Violet had no capacity to appreciate it. Every step was an effort, her pregnancy throwing off her balance, her feet unused to such exertion. She had been a shopkeeper's daughter, then a rancher's wife. Her life had involved work, certainly, but not this kind of desperate endurance. Hours passed. The sun began its descent toward the mountains, painting the sky in shades of orange and red that reminded Violet of fire. Her water was already running low. She rationed it carefully, allowing herself only small sips, but her body demanded more in the brutal heat. The baby moved inside her, small flutters that both comforted and terrified her. Her child was alive, still depending on her, still trusting her to provide safety. "I won't let you down," Violet whispered, one hand on her belly. "I promise. We're going to survive this." As twilight descended, the temperature dropped rapidly. Violet wrapped the blanket tighter around herself and kept walking. Stars emerged overhead, more than she had ever seen in Sacramento, a vast glittering expanse that made her feel impossibly small. Her feet ached, her legs trembled with exhaustion, but she pushed forward. She must have walked 4 or 5 hours into the night before exhaustion finally defeated her. Violet found a small outcropping of rocks that provided some shelter from the wind and sank down gratefully. She allowed herself 3 crackers and a small handful of the dried beans, washing them down with precious water. Then she wrapped herself in the blanket and tried to sleep, but sleep wouldn't come. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw the guard falling, the young husband dying to protect his wife, the elderly merchant's futile attempt to flee. She heard the bride's screams echoing in her memory. And she thought of Thomas, her kind, ambitious Thomas, who had promised her a new life in Nevada, who had died alone and far from home. They had met in Sacramento, where Violet had been working as a seamstress after her parents' death from influenza. Thomas had been working as a ranch hand, saving every penny, dreaming of his own land. He had courted her with wildflowers and shy smiles, and Violet had fallen for his gentle nature and his determination to build something better. Their wedding had been simple, just the 2 of them and a preacher, but Violet had been happy. She had been so happy. Now she was alone, widowed and pregnant, stranded in the desert with killers somewhere behind her and an uncertain future ahead. Violet wanted to give up, wanted to just lie down and let the desert take her, but the baby moved again, reminding her that she wasn't truly alone. She had to keep going. For this child. For Thomas's child, dawn came slowly, the sky lightening from black to deep blue to pale gold. Violet forced herself to stand despite every muscle screaming in protest. She drank more water, ate another cracker, and resumed walking. The sun rose behind her, and she kept her makeshift shade pulled tight, but the heat built quickly. By mid-morning, Violet was stumbling more than walking. The landscape blurred around her, all looking the same. Had she somehow gotten turned around? Was she walking in circles? She tried to use the sun to maintain her direction, but everything was confusion and heat and desperate thirst. She was going to die. The thought came with strange clarity. She had tried, had fought as hard as she could, but it wasn't enough. The desert was going to claim her and her baby both. Violet fell to her knees, unable to take another step. She fumbled for the canteen, but it was empty. When had she drunk the last of it? She couldn't remember. The baby wasn't moving anymore, and that terrified her more than anything else. "Please," she whispered to the empty desert, to God, to anyone who might hear. "Please help us." The sound of hoofbeats seemed like a hallucination at first. Violet looked up, squinting against the sun, and saw a rider approaching. For a terrible moment, she thought the outlaws had found her, had come back to finish what they had started. But as the figure drew closer, she saw it was a single man, alone, leading a pack horse. He swung down from his saddle and rushed toward her. "Madam, madam, can you hear me?" His voice was deep and warm, touched with concern. Violet tried to answer, but her mouth was too dry. Strong hands caught her before she collapsed completely, and then she was being lifted, carried to the shade of a large rock. A canteen pressed against her lips, and she drank desperately. "Easy now, not too fast," the man said, pulling the water away before she could make herself sick. "You've got heat exhaustion. Small sips." Violet's vision slowly cleared, and she got her first real look at her rescuer. He was perhaps 30 years old, with dark hair that curled slightly under his hat, a strong jaw shadowed with several days' beard growth, and eyes the color of storm clouds. His face was weathered by sun and wind, marked with fine lines around his eyes and a small scar through one eyebrow. He wore dusty trail clothes and a gun belt low on his hips, the leather worn smooth with use. "What happened to you?" he asked, offering her another small sip of water. "Where's your wagon, your companions?" The memories flooded back, and Violet felt tears burning in her eyes despite her dehydration. "Outlaws," she managed to say. "Yesterday afternoon, they stopped our stage, killed the men, took everything." His expression hardened, mouth pressing into a grim line. "How many?" "5. They took the other woman, rode south toward Mexico. They said I would die anyway, so they left me." Her hand moved to her belly. "The baby. Please, is the baby all right?" The man's face softened slightly. "I'm not a doctor, madam, but we need to get you somewhere safe, somewhere you can rest proper. Rhyolite is about 3 hours' ride east. Think you can manage on horseback?" "I can manage anything," Violet said, and meant it. She had walked through the night in half a day. She could survive a few hours on a horse. He helped her stand, steadying her when she swayed. "Name's Barrett Knox," he said. "I'm a bounty hunter, was tracking a gang when I saw you out here." "Violet Preston," she replied. "My husband was Thomas Preston. He died in San Francisco 6 weeks ago. I was trying to reach Rhyolite, to the property he bought for us." Barrett's eyes held sympathy, but also something else, a kind of recognition. "I'm sorry for your loss, Mrs. Preston. Let's get you somewhere safe first, then we can sort out the rest." He lifted her onto his horse with surprising gentleness, mindful of her pregnancy, then swung up behind her. His arms bracketed her as he took the reins, and Violet leaned back against his solid warmth despite herself. She was too exhausted to maintain propriety, too grateful to be alive to care about appearances. "The Outlaws," she said as they began moving at a careful pace. "The woman they took, she was so young, and they killed her husband right in front of her. Her name was Sarah, I think. She was traveling with her new husband to Virginia City." Barrett's jaw tightened. 5 men riding south. Their leader was tall, broad shoulders. He was the one who made the decisions. The others followed his orders. Violet closed her eyes, trying to remember details through the haze of terror. One of them had a gray horse with white stockings. Another had silver conchos on his saddle. I saw them catch the light. "That's good," Barrett said. "Details like that help. The marshal in Rhyolite will want your statement." They rode in silence for a while, the steady rhythm of the horse's gait almost lulling Violet into sleep, despite the discomfort. Barrett adjusted his hold on her slightly, keeping her secure, and she felt safer than she had since leaving Sacramento. "Why were you out here alone?" she asked eventually. "You said you were tracking someone, gang of cattle thieves," Barrett said. "Lost their trail yesterday when they hit rock ground. I was circling back to pick it up when I spotted you." He paused. "God's providence, maybe. If I'd been an hour later in any direction, I would have missed you entirely." Violet shuddered at the thought. "Then I'm grateful for your poor tracking," she said, then immediately felt embarrassed. "I didn't mean it like that." She felt rather than saw his small smile. "I knew what you meant, madam." The sun climbed higher, and the heat built despite the slow pace Barrett maintained for Violet's sake. He stopped twice to let her drink and rest in whatever shade they could find. The second time, he unwrapped some jerky from his pack and insisted she eat despite her protests that he needed the food himself. "I've got plenty," he said firmly. "And you're eating for 2. Your baby needs the strength." The kindness in his voice made Violet's throat tight. She had grown so accustomed to being alone, to having no one who cared about her welfare, that this simple concern from a stranger overwhelmed her. She ate the jerky and drank the water and tried not to cry. Barrett pretended not to notice her emotional struggle, busying himself with checking the horse's hooves and adjusting the pack on his second mount. When Violet had composed herself, he helped her back onto the horse, and they continued east. Rhyolite appeared in the distance around 3 in the afternoon, a collection of buildings shimmering in the heat haze. Violet felt something loosen in her chest at the sight. She had made it. Against all odds, despite everything that had happened, she had reached the town where Thomas had planned to build their future. The town was larger than she had expected, benefiting from recent gold discoveries in the area. The main street boasted several saloons, a general store, a hotel, and various other businesses that catered to miners and prospectors. People moved along the wooden sidewalks, and the sound of hammering indicated new construction somewhere nearby. Barrett guided his horse directly to a small building with a sign that read, "Marshal's Office." He dismounted first, then carefully lifted Violet down, keeping a steadying hand on her elbow as her legs remembered how to bear weight. The marshal was a weathered man in his 50s, with gray hair and sharp eyes that missed nothing. He stood as they entered, his gaze taking in Violet's disheveled appearance and obvious pregnancy. "Barrett," he said, then looked at Violet. "Madam, you look like you've had a rough time of it." "Stagecoach robbery," Barrett said bluntly. "Yesterday afternoon, maybe 20 miles west of here. 5 men killed 4 people including the driver and guard, took 1 female hostage, left Mrs. Preston to die in the desert." The marshal's expression darkened. "Sit down, madam, please. Tell me everything you remember." Violet sank into a chair gratefully and recounted the attack in as much detail as she could manage. The marshal took notes, asking occasional questions about the outlaws' appearance, their horses, their weapons. When she described the young bride being dragged away, still screaming, the marshal's mouth set in a grim line. "That matches a gang that's been operating in the territory for about 3 months, he said, "led by a man named Cole Vance. They rob stages, hit isolated homesteads, and they've taken at least 2 other women that we know of. Never recovered them. The women, I mean." Violet felt sick. "So that poor girl, Sarah. We'll do everything we can," the marshal said, but his tone suggested he didn't hold much hope. "Problem is they've got a day's head start, and they're heading into rough country where they've got contacts. But I'll wire the marshals in California and Arizona, let them know what happened." Barrett had been standing silent near the door, but now he spoke up. "I could track them." The marshal looked at him skeptically. "You said yourself you lost the trail on those cattle thieves. This gang, they're smart. They'll have covered their tracks." "Maybe," Barrett agreed, "but they weren't expecting witnesses. They might have gotten careless. And I'm better at tracking men than cattle." "There's no bounty on them," the marshal pointed out. "I know." Barrett's voice was flat, matter-of-fact. "Sometimes the right thing matters more than money." The marshal studied him for a long moment, then nodded. "I can't stop you. But you'll be on your own. I don't have the men to spare for a posse, and this town's got problems enough without the marshal disappearing into the desert." "Understood." Barrett turned to Violet. "Mrs. Preston needs a place to stay." "The hotel? I don't have money for a hotel," Violet said quietly. The outlaws had taken everything. She owned literally nothing except the clothes on her back and Thomas's land somewhere in this town. The marshal frowned thoughtfully. "What did you say your husband's name was?" "Thomas Preston. He bought property here a few months ago, was building a house. He died before he could finish it." Recognition flashed in the marshal's eyes. "I knew Tom. Good man. His land is about 2 miles north of town, nice spot with a creek running through it. The house is half built, but the cabin he was living in while he worked is still there. Basic but solid. You've got a legal claim to that property as his widow." Violet felt tears threaten again. "I can stay there. It's yours by right," the marshal said gently. "I'll have someone from town take you out there, make sure everything's secure. Tom left some supplies, I think. And the town ladies will help you get settled. We take care of our own in Rhyolite." "Thank you," Violet whispered. "Thank you so much." Barrett shifted his weight, clearly ready to leave and begin his pursuit of the outlaws. But he lingered, looking at Violet with an expression she couldn't quite read. "Mrs. Preston, you're sure you'll be all right?" "I survived the desert alone," Violet said, trying to sound more confident than she felt. "I'll manage a cabin," he nodded slowly. "The Preston land. I know where that is. When I get back, I'll come check on you, make sure you're settled." "You don't have to, I want to," Barrett said simply. Then he turned and walked out, leaving Violet staring after him in confusion. The marshal cleared his throat. "Barrett Knox is a good man. Doesn't say much, keeps to himself, but he's honest and he keeps his word. If he says he'll check on you, he will." "He saved my life," Violet said softly. "Then I'd say you were very lucky he happened to be in the right place." The marshal stood. "Let me find Mrs. Chen from the general store. She'll help you get out to the property and make sure you've got what you need." Mrs. Chen turned out to be a brisk, efficient Chinese woman whose husband ran the largest general store in Rhyolite. She took one look at Violet and immediately began organizing, sending her teenage son to hitch up a wagon while she gathered supplies from the store. "You need food, yes," Mrs. Chen said, not waiting for an answer. "And soap, clean clothes. You cannot wear this." She gestured at Violet's torn, filthy dress. "Very bad. You need proper rest, good food. Baby needs healthy mother." Violet tried to protest that she had no way to pay for any of this, but Mrs. Chen waved her objections aside. "You pay later when you can. Your husband, he was good customer. Always polite, always pay on time. His wife, we help. This is how community works." The kindness was overwhelming. Violet had expected to arrive in Rhyolite and face suspicion or indifference. Instead, she found people rallying around her, offering help without expectation of immediate return. It reminded her that despite all the cruelty and violence she had witnessed, there was still goodness in the world. The ride to Thomas's property took about 30 minutes. The land was beautiful, nestled against the foothills with the creek the marshal had mentioned running clear and cold through the middle. The half-built house stood on a slight rise, its timber frame skeletal against the sky. But the cabin nearby was complete, a simple one-room structure with a stone fireplace and a sturdy door. Inside, Violet found evidence of Thomas's presence everywhere. His spare clothes hung on pegs along the wall. His tools were arranged neatly on a workbench. A book she had given him, a collection of poetry, sat on the small table beside the narrow bed. Seeing these remnants of his life, his plans, his dreams broke something open inside her. Mrs. Chen quietly began unpacking supplies, giving Violet space to grieve. When the tears finally stopped, Violet found fresh water in a basin, clean clothes laid out on the bed, and food warming by the fireplace. "You rest now," Mrs. Chen said firmly. "Tomorrow, ladies from town come visit, bring more supplies. But today you rest. You have been through very much. You and baby need peace." After Mrs. Chen left, Violet stripped out of her ruined dress and washed away the desert dust and dried sweat. The clean clothes, a simple cotton dress in pale blue, felt like heaven against her skin. She ate the stew Mrs. Chen had left, the first real meal she'd had in 2 days, and felt strength returning to her exhausted body. The cabin was quiet except for the gentle sound of the creek outside. Violet lay down on the bed, on the same mattress where Thomas had slept, and finally felt safe enough to truly rest. Her hand rested on her belly, feeling the baby move in response to her touch. "We made it," she whispered. "Your father wanted us here, wanted to build a life in this place, and we're here now. We're going to be all right." She didn't know if she believed it, but saying the words helped. Violet closed her eyes and let sleep claim her. She woke to golden afternoon light and the sound of someone chopping wood outside. For a confused moment, Violet thought it must be Thomas, that everything had been a terrible dream. But reality reasserted itself as she sat up, alone in the cabin except for the child moving inside her. The chopping continued, steady and rhythmic. Violet stood, smoothing her dress, and went to the door. A young man, perhaps 19 or 20, was splitting logs near the woodpile. He saw her and stopped, pulling off his hat politely. "Afternoon, madam. Didn't mean to wake you. I'm Jacob from the Chen store. My ma sent me out to make sure you had enough firewood for the next few days." "That's very kind," Violet said, "but I'm sure you have other work to do." Jacob shrugged, grinning. "Ma said to do this first, and when Ma says something, you do it. Trust me on that." Despite everything, Violet found herself smiling. "I'm learning that about your mother." She went back inside and found bread and cheese that Mrs. Chen must have left. Violet cut portions for herself and Jacob, bringing them outside along with water from the creek. They sat on the bench Thomas had built outside the cabin door, eating in comfortable silence. "Did you know my husband?" Violet asked eventually. "Yes, madam. Mr. Preston used to come into the store pretty regular. He talked about you a lot, about how he was building that house for when you arrived. He was real excited about being a father, too. He showed everyone the letter when you wrote telling him about the baby." Jacob looked embarrassed. "Sorry. Maybe that's not something you want to hear right now." "No," Violet said softly. "It helps. I only got a few letters from him after he left for San Francisco. It's good to know he was thinking of us." Jacob nodded. He finished his lunch and went back to chopping wood, building the pile high enough to last Violet at least a week. Before he left, he checked that the door latched properly and pointed out where Thomas had stored various supplies. "Folks will be by to check on you regular," he said. "And if you need anything at all, you just come into town. Someone will help." After he left, Violet explored the property more thoroughly. The creek would provide water and likely fish. Thomas had already started a small vegetable garden, now overgrown with weeds, but salvageable. The frame of the house showed his ambitious plans. A real home with multiple rooms, glass windows, a covered porch. He had wanted to give her something wonderful. Violet walked through the skeleton of timbers, imagining what it might have looked like finished. Their bedroom here, a nursery there, a kitchen with a proper stove. Dreams made of wood and hope, now just reminders of what would never be. But she could still live here, she realized. The cabin was small but functional. With work and time, maybe she could even finish the house herself or hire someone to complete it. This land was hers now, the only thing of value she possessed in the world. She would make it work. The next few days established a routine. Women from town visited regularly, bringing food, clothes, baby items. They helped Violet clean the cabin more thoroughly, organized Thomas's possessions, and offered advice about everything from gardening to childbirth. The community embraced her, this pregnant widow who had survived the desert, and Violet felt herself beginning to heal. But she couldn't stop thinking about the attack. She dreamed of it every night, seeing the guard fall, hearing Sarah's screams, watching the outlaws ride away. And she thought about Barrett Knox, who had ridden out into the desert alone to track 5 dangerous men, who had promised to check on her when he returned. If he returned. A week passed, then 2. Violet worked in the garden, salvaging what she could and planting new vegetables with seeds provided by Mrs. Chen. She cleaned out the half-built house, sweeping away months of accumulated dust and debris. She washed Thomas's clothes and packed them away, not ready to get rid of them but unable to look at them hanging on the wall anymore. The baby grew more active, kicking strongly enough to wake her at night. Violet talked to the child constantly, telling stories about Thomas, about Boston, about her hopes for their future. She needed to believe they had a future. 3 weeks after the attack, Violet was hanging laundry on the line when she heard a horse approaching. Her heart jumped into her throat, irrational fear gripping her despite being safely on her own property. But the rider was Barrett Knox, leading his pack horse as before, looking dusty and tired but unharmed. Violet dropped the wet shirt she had been holding and walked toward him, relief flooding through her so intensely it made her dizzy. Barrett dismounted, his storm-gray eyes searching her face with concern. "Mrs. Preston." "You're well?" "I'm fine," Violet said. "The town has been very kind. The cabin is comfortable, but did you find them, the outlaws?" Barrett's expression darkened. "I tracked them for 4 days into Arizona territory, caught up with them at a canyon hideout they use. There was a fight." "And Sarah, the young woman they took?" "I'm sorry," Barrett said quietly. "She didn't make it. By the time I found their camp, she was already gone. They had buried her in a shallow grave about a day's ride from their hideout." Violet felt tears burning. She had known, logically, that the chance of Sarah surviving was slim, but hearing it confirmed still hurt. "Those monsters. They won't hurt anyone else," Barrett said. "The marshal in Tucson has 3 of them in custody. The other 2, including the leader, didn't survive the arrest. I'm sorry I couldn't do more." "You risked your life trying to save her," Violet said. "That's more than most people would have done, especially for strangers." Barrett looked uncomfortable with the praise. He shifted his weight, glancing around the property. "You've been managing all right out here. The cabin suits you." "It's Thomas's cabin," Violet said. "Or was. Now it's mine and the baby's. And yes, we're managing fine. Would you like to come in? I have coffee, and I'm a decent cook even with limited supplies." She could see him hesitate, clearly torn between the desire to check on her properly and not wanting to impose. Violet made the decision for him, turning toward the cabin with the expectation that he would follow. After a moment, he did, tying his horses to the rail outside. Inside, Violet busied herself making coffee and heating up stew left over from her lunch. Barrett stood awkwardly near the door until she told him firmly to sit down. He obeyed, looking around the small cabin with an expression that suggested he was cataloging every detail. "You knew my husband?" Violet asked as she worked. "Met him a few times in town. Seemed like a good man. Hardworking. He talked about building you a real house, making something of this land." "He did build it." Violet gestured out the window at the half-finished frame. "He just didn't get to complete it." She served the stew and coffee, sitting across from Barrett at the small table. He ate with the single-minded focus of someone who hadn't had a proper meal in days. Violet waited until he had finished before speaking again. "The marshal said you're a bounty hunter." Barrett nodded, wiping his mouth with the back of his hand. "For about 5 years now. Used to be a ranch hand, but the pay was terrible and the work harder. This way I set my own schedule, choose my own jobs." "And you chose to go after those outlaws even though there was no bounty," Violet said. "Why?" He was quiet for a long moment, staring into his coffee. "Because it was the right thing to do," he said finally. "And because I've seen what men like that do to people. I've tracked down enough of them to know they don't stop unless someone stops them. Maybe I couldn't save that young woman, but at least 3 of them will hang for what they've done." There was old pain in his voice, something dark and personal. Violet wanted to ask about it but sensed he wouldn't welcome the questions. Instead, she said, "Thank you for saving me and for trying to save Sarah. It matters." Barrett looked at her then, really looked at her, and Violet felt suddenly self-conscious. His gaze wasn't predatory or uncomfortable, but it was intense, as if he was trying to understand something about her that he couldn't quite figure out. "What will you do now?" he asked. "Stay here. Try to work this land alone." "I don't have much choice," Violet said honestly. "I have no family back in California, no money to travel anywhere else even if I did. This land, this cabin, it's all I have. So yes, I'll stay. I'll figure out how to make it work." "You'll need help," Barrett said bluntly. "This place needs work." The garden, the irrigation from the creek, repairs to the house frame before winter comes and damages the wood. You can't do all that alone, especially not in your condition. Violet bristled slightly at his tone. I'm pregnant, not helpless. I've been managing just fine so far. I didn't say you were helpless, Barrett said, holding up one hand. But there's a difference between managing and thriving. You asked what I'll do now. Well, I don't have any jobs lined up at the moment. I could stay around Rhyolite for a while, help you get this place in working order. Violet stared at him in surprise. Why would you do that? Barrett stood, carrying his empty bowl to the basin. He rinsed it carefully before answering. Because you deserve a fighting chance. Because your husband should have been here to finish what he started, and since he can't be, someone should help. And because I like this area well enough. Rhyolite is growing. Might be a good place to settle for a while between jobs. I can't pay you, Violet warned. Not until I have crops to sell or some other income. Didn't ask for payment, Barrett said. Room and board would be enough. I can sleep in the partially built house, keep out of your way. I'll work on the property during the day, head into town for bounty work if something comes up. No strings, no obligations. Just help between neighbors. It was a generous offer, suspiciously generous. Violet tried to think of reasons to refuse, to maintain her independence and not rely on this man she barely knew. But practicality won out over pride. She did need help. The baby was due in 3 months, and there were 1,000 tasks that needed completing before then. All right, she said slowly. But only if you let me feed you properly and do your laundry. I won't feel like a charity case. Barrett's mouth quirked in what might have been a smile. Deal. He moved into the partially completed house that very afternoon, clearing a corner of the structure and setting up a simple camp with his bedroll and supplies. It was open to the elements on 3 sides, but the roof over that section was complete, and Barrett assured Violet he had slept in far worse conditions. The next morning, Violet woke to the sound of hammering. She dressed quickly and went outside to find Barrett already at work on the house, measuring and cutting boards with Thomas's tools. He worked with the confident efficiency of someone who knew his way around construction. You're starting early, Violet called up to him. Daylight is too valuable to waste, Barrett replied, not pausing in his work. If I'm going to make this house livable before your baby comes, I need to use every hour I can. The weeks that followed established a new rhythm. Barrett worked on the house from dawn until the heat became unbearable, then switched to other tasks. Repairing the irrigation system Thomas had started, reinforcing the cabin's roof, building a proper chicken coop. Violet tended the garden, prepared meals, and tried to stay useful despite her growing belly making every task more difficult. They fell into an easy companionship, talking while they worked. Barrett told her about his life as a bounty hunter, the places he had been, the characters he had encountered. He had a dry sense of humor that emerged slowly, and Violet found herself laughing more than she had in months. In turn, Violet told him about Boston, about her parents and their small shop, about meeting Thomas and deciding to risk everything on a new life out west. She talked about her fears for the baby, her grief for Thomas, her determination to make this land productive enough to support them both. You're stronger than you think, Barrett said one evening as they sat on the porch watching the sun set over the mountains. Most people would have given up in that desert. You kept walking. I didn't have a choice, Violet said. Everyone has a choice. You chose to live. That takes courage. Violet looked at him, at his weathered face and serious eyes, and felt something shift in her chest. It wasn't love, not yet, but it was the beginning of something. Recognition, perhaps, of someone who understood loss and survival in a way most people never would. As the days passed, the house took shape. Barrett worked with relentless determination, and the skeleton of timbers gradually gained walls and doors and window frames. He consulted Violet on every decision, showing her samples of wood for the floors, asking her opinion on where to place the interior walls, making sure the house he was building matched the one she wanted. "It's your home," he said when she questioned why he kept asking her. "You're the one who will live here. It should be exactly what you need." The women from town noticed Barrett's presence, of course. Rhyolite was too small for anything to stay secret for long. Some of the ladies looked at Violet with barely concealed disapproval, scandalized that a widow in mourning would have a single man living on her property. But Mrs. Chen, bless her, shut down the gossip firmly. "Mr. Knox sleeps in unfinished house," she said loudly at the general store when one of the town's busybodies made a snide comment. "Mrs. Preston is respectable widow who needs help. He provides help. This is Christian charity, not scandal. Maybe you should try charity instead of wagging tongue." Violet heard about the incident from Mrs. Chen's daughter and felt both grateful and mortified. She didn't want to damage Barrett's reputation or her own. That evening, as they ate dinner together on the porch, she brought up the subject. "People in town are talking," she said quietly, "about you being here, living on the property. I don't want to cause you trouble." Barrett's jaw tightened. "Let them talk. I'm not doing anything wrong, and neither are you. If small-minded people want to see scandal where there is none, that's their problem, not ours." "But your reputation, my reputation, is that of a bounty hunter who has killed wanted men and brought others in to hang," Barrett said bluntly. "I'm not exactly respectable society. A few gossips saying I'm helping a widow isn't going to change anything." He stood abruptly, his meal half finished, and walked toward the creek. Violet watched him go, recognizing that she had hit a nerve somehow. After a moment's hesitation, she followed, finding him skipping stones across the water with controlled violence. "I'm sorry," Violet said. "I didn't mean to upset you." Barrett threw another stone, watching it skip 3 times before sinking. "I had a wife once," he said, not looking at Violet. "Her name was Emily. We had a small ranch in Colorado, nothing fancy, but it was ours. I was 24, she was 22, we were happy." He paused, and Violet waited, knowing he needed to tell this story in his own time. "I went into town one day to get supplies. I was gone maybe 6 hours. When I came back, the ranch had been hit by outlaws. They had stolen our cattle, burned the barn, and they had killed Emily. Just shot her and left her there because she tried to stop them from taking everything we owned." Violet felt tears stinging her eyes. "Barrett, I'm so sorry." "The law did nothing," Barrett continued, his voice flat and empty. "Said they didn't have enough men to chase down every gang of thieves. So I learned to track. I learned to shoot better than I already could, and I went after them myself. Took me 9 months, but I found them, every single one of them. Some went to jail, some didn't make it that far." He finally turned to look at Violet, and his eyes held old pain that had never fully healed. "That was 6 years ago. I've been tracking wanted men ever since. It doesn't bring Emily back, but it means other women might not lose their husbands or their lives to men who think they can take whatever they want." Violet reached out, placing her hand on his arm. "You've saved lives. The work you do matters." "Maybe," Barrett said. "But it doesn't make me respectable. So if people want to talk about me helping you, let them. I'm not leaving. You need someone here, and I'm not going to abandon you because of gossip." "Thank you," Violet whispered, "for everything. For saving my life, for helping with the property, for being honest with me. I know we haven't known each other long, but I consider you a friend." Barrett looked at her hand on his arm, then back at her face. Something flickered in his expression, something that made Violet's breath catch. But he just nodded and said, "Friends. I'd like that. They walked back to the cabin together, the moment passing but leaving something changed between them. Violet was acutely aware of Barrett beside her, of his presence in a way she hadn't allowed herself to acknowledge before. She was a pregnant widow still mourning her husband. She had no business thinking about another man, especially not one who had become such an important part of her daily life. But her heart, it seemed, had ideas of its own. Summer deepened into late August. The garden flourished under Violet's care, providing vegetables for their meals and extra to preserve for winter. The house progressed steadily, now with complete walls and a functioning front door. Barrett had installed the windows, precious glass panes he had hauled carefully from town, and the interior was taking shape with Thomas's original design as a guide. Violet's pregnancy advanced, her belly growing large and her movements increasingly awkward. Barrett became protective in subtle ways, taking over tasks that required lifting or stretching, insisting she rest during the hottest parts of the day. He built her a comfortable chair for the porch, perfectly angled to catch the evening breeze, and Violet spent her evenings there, watching him work while the baby kicked against her ribs. "Have you thought of names?" Barrett asked one evening as he joined her on the porch, both of them exhausted from the day's work. "For a boy, I was thinking Thomas after his father," Violet said. "For a girl, I like the name Sarah." Barrett looked at her sharply. "After the young woman from the stage," Violet nodded. "She died because I survived. The Outlaws left me in the desert specifically because they thought I would die anyway. Sarah died in my place. I want to honor that, want her to be remembered as more than just another victim." "That's a good name," Barrett said quietly. "A name with meaning." They sat in companionable silence, listening to the creek and the evening birds. Violet found herself studying Barrett's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the way the setting sun turned his dark hair almost copper. He had become so familiar to her, so essential to her daily existence, that she couldn't quite remember what life had been like before he arrived. "Barrett," she said, not quite sure what she intended to ask. He turned to look at her, and the expression in his eyes made her heart race. There was longing there, carefully controlled but unmistakable. He felt it too, this growing connection between them. The realization should have frightened Violet, but instead it filled her with a confused mixture of guilt and hope. "I should check on the horses," Barrett said abruptly, standing. "You should get some rest. Big day tomorrow, we're putting up the interior walls." He left before Violet could respond, practically fleeing to the safety of distance and work. Violet sat alone on the porch, one hand on her belly, and tried to sort through her tangled emotions. She had loved Thomas. Still loved him in many ways. He had been kind and gentle and good. But Thomas was gone, and she was here, alive and trying to build a future for their child. Was it wrong to feel drawn to Barrett? Was it disloyal to Thomas's memory to care for another man? The baby kicked hard, as if offering an opinion on the matter. Violet smiled despite her confusion. "What do you think, little one? Your father would want us to be happy, wouldn't he? He wouldn't want me to be alone forever." She received another kick in response, which she chose to interpret as agreement. September arrived, bringing cooler temperatures and the realization that Violet's time was growing short. The baby had dropped lower, and she felt increased pressure and discomfort. Mrs. Chen visited regularly, bringing an older woman named Mrs. Patterson who had served as a midwife for most of the births in Rhyolite. Mrs. Patterson examined Violet with brisk efficiency. "Baby is positioned well," she announced. "Should be an easier birth than some, God willing. You're strong and healthy. When the time comes, send for me immediately. I live above the saloon. My son can fetch me any hour, day or night." "I'll make sure she gets word," Barrett said from the doorway, and Violet felt reassured knowing he would be there. The house was nearly finished now. A real home with separate bedrooms, a proper kitchen, even a small room that could serve as a nursery. Barrett had worked himself nearly to exhaustion completing it, driven by some internal need to have everything ready before the baby arrived. "You've done so much," Violet said, standing in the main room and looking around at the beautiful space. "More than I could have dreamed. I don't know how to thank you." "You don't need to thank me," Barrett said. He was measuring boards for the final touches, shelving for the kitchen. "I told you I wanted to help." "But why?" Violet asked, the question that had been building for weeks finally spilling out. "Really, why? You could have moved on after checking that I was settled. You didn't need to stay for months building me a house working this land." "What are you getting out of this?" Barrett set down his measuring tape and turned to face her. For a long moment he just looked at her, and Violet saw the war playing out behind his eyes. Finally, he spoke. "Because when I found you in the desert, dying and refusing to give up, it reminded me that there's still good in the world worth fighting for. Because working on this land, building this house, it's given me something I haven't had in years. Purpose. Peace. A reason to wake up that isn't about tracking down another criminal." He took a step closer. "And because you've become important to me, Violet, more important than is probably wise or proper, but there it is." Violet's breath caught in her throat. "Barrett, I'm not asking for anything," he said quickly. "I know you're grieving your husband. I know you're about to have his child. I'm not trying to replace him or complicate your life. But you asked why I stayed, and I'm telling you the truth. I stayed because I couldn't bear the thought of leaving you." The words hung between them, raw and honest. Violet felt tears spilling down her cheeks, though she wasn't entirely sure why she was crying. Relief, perhaps, that he had voiced what she had been feeling but couldn't admit. Fear that acting on these feelings would be a betrayal. Hope that maybe, somehow, she could have a second chance at happiness. "I care about you too," she whispered. "I've been trying not to, trying to focus only on the baby and survival, but you've made that impossible. You're the first person I think about when I wake up, the last person I think about before I sleep. And I feel guilty for it. Guilty that I'm having these feelings when Thomas has been gone less than 6 months." Barrett closed the distance between them, taking her hands gently. "There's no timeline for grief, Violet. No rules that say when you're allowed to start living again. Thomas would want you to be happy. He would want his child to have a father, a family." "Are you saying—" Violet couldn't finish the question, too afraid of the answer either way. "I'm saying that when you're ready, if you're ever ready, I'll be here," Barrett said. "I'll wait as long as it takes, and if you decide you only want friendship, I'll accept that too. But I needed you to know how I feel." Before Violet could respond, a sharp pain lanced through her abdomen, making her gasp. Her waters broke suddenly, soaking her skirt and the floor, and she looked at Barrett with wide, frightened eyes. "The baby," she managed to say. "It's coming now." Barrett's face went pale, but he snapped into action immediately. He helped Violet to the bedroom they had prepared, getting her settled on the bed. "I'm going to ride for Mrs. Patterson. Will you be all right alone for 20 minutes? "I think so," Violet said, trying not to panic as another contraction hit. "Hurry." Barrett ran for his horse, and Violet heard him gallop away at dangerous speed. She focused on breathing through the pain, trying to remember everything Mrs. Patterson had told her about labor. The contractions were still far apart, which meant she probably had hours ahead of her. First babies took time, Mrs. Patterson had said. There was no need to panic. But Violet was panicking anyway, alone in the house she had helped Barrett build, about to bring new life into the world without Thomas there to witness it. She wanted her mother, wanted her husband, wanted anyone who could tell her she was going to be all right. Barrett returned in 15 minutes, Mrs. Patterson riding behind him on the horse, her medical bag clutched to her chest. The midwife took control immediately, shooing Barrett from the room and helping Violet into a clean nightgown. "First babies take their time, Mrs. Patterson said calmly, examining Violet. "You're doing just fine. The hard part comes later, but you're strong. You'll manage." The hours that followed blurred together in a haze of pain and exhaustion. Mrs. Patterson coached Violet through each contraction, showing her how to breathe, how to push when the time came. From the other room, Violet could hear Barrett pacing, his boots wearing a path across the new wooden floor. Night fell, and still the baby didn't come. Mrs. Patterson showed no concern, assuring Violet that everything was progressing normally, but Violet felt her strength waning. She had survived the desert, survived loss and trauma, but this pain was different, overwhelming in its intensity. "I can't do this," Violet gasped during a particularly brutal contraction. "I can't." "Yes, you can," Mrs. Patterson said firmly. "You're almost there. A few more pushes and you'll meet your baby. Think about that. Think about holding your child." Violet closed her eyes and thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned together. She thought about Barrett, waiting anxiously in the next room. She thought about the house that now stood complete, the land that held so much promise. She had so much to live for, so much to fight for. With a final, desperate effort, Violet pushed. The pain peaked beyond endurance and then suddenly released as the baby slipped free. A thin, angry wail filled the room and Mrs. Patterson laughed with delight. "It's a girl," the midwife announced, quickly cleaning the infant and wrapping her in soft blankets. "A beautiful, healthy girl." Violet reached out with trembling arms, and Mrs. Patterson placed the baby against her chest. The infant quieted immediately, her tiny face scrunching as she tried to focus on her mother. Violet felt love slam into her with the force of a physical blow. This was her daughter, hers and Thomas's. A piece of him that would live on, that she would protect and nurture and love for the rest of her life. "Hello, Sarah," Violet whispered, tears streaming down her face. "Welcome to the world, sweetheart. You're so loved, so very loved." Mrs. Patterson bustled around, taking care of the necessary medical tasks while Violet simply held her daughter and marveled. Sarah had dark hair like Thomas, but her eyes, when they opened briefly, looked like they might be gray, like Barrett's eyes. The thought made Violet smile despite her exhaustion. Of course her daughter would have the eyes of the man who had helped save them both. Mrs. Patterson opened the bedroom door and called out, "Mr. Knox, you can come in now." Barrett appeared in the doorway, looking terrified and hopeful in equal measure. He approached the bed slowly, as if afraid he might break something, and looked down at the baby with an expression of absolute wonder. "She's perfect," he said softly. "Would you like to hold her?" Violet asked. Barrett looked shocked. "I couldn't." "I might drop her, or—" "You won't drop her," Mrs. Patterson said, taking the baby from Violet and placing her firmly in Barrett's arms before he could protest. "Support her head. There, you see? Natural." Barrett stood frozen, staring down at Sarah with naked emotion on his face. The baby yawned, a tiny sound, and nestled into his arms as if she belonged there. Violet watched them together and felt something settle deep in her heart. This was right. This strange family they had formed, this life they were building, it was exactly where she was meant to be. Mrs. Patterson stayed through the night, making sure both mother and baby were stable. By morning, she declared everything satisfactory and prepared to return to town. "I'll stop by every few days to check on you both," she said. "And Mr. Knox, you make sure Mrs. Preston rests. No working in that garden for at least 2 weeks." "I'll make sure," Barrett promised, After Mrs. Patterson left, Barrett prepared breakfast while Violet nursed Sarah for the first time. The baby latched on immediately, and Violet felt another surge of relief. Everything was working as it should. They were going to be fine. Barrett brought her eggs and toast, hovering nervously until Violet laughed and told him to sit down. "I'm not made of glass," she said. "I just gave birth. Women have been doing this since the beginning of time." "Doesn't mean it wasn't terrifying to listen to," Barrett said. He looked at Sarah, now sleeping peacefully in her mother's arms. "She really is beautiful, Violet." "She is," Violet agreed. "Thank you for being here, for getting Mrs. Patterson so quickly, for staying with me through all of this." "There's nowhere else I would have been," Barrett said simply. The next weeks passed in a blur of sleepless nights and constant feeding. Sarah was a good baby, relatively calm, but she still required round-the-clock attention. Barrett took over all the household tasks, cooking and cleaning and managing the property, while Violet focused on recovery and caring for her daughter. He was also surprisingly good with the baby. When Sarah cried and Violet was too exhausted to rise, Barrett would walk her around the house, bouncing her gently and humming off key lullabies until she settled. He built her a beautiful cradle that rocked smoothly, carving tiny flowers into the wood. He rode into town and returned with soft blankets and baby clothes, gifts from the women who had supported Violet throughout her pregnancy. October arrived, painting the mountains in shades of gold and red. Violet was finally strong enough to venture outside regularly, and she would sit on the porch with Sarah while Barrett worked on the final touches to the property. He had started building a proper barn, preparing for winter, and for the future expansion Violet dreamed about. One evening, as they sat together watching the sunset, Sarah sleeping in Violet's arms, Barrett cleared his throat nervously. "I've been thinking," he said, "about what happens next. For me, I mean." Violet's heart sank. She had known this moment was coming, had dreaded it. Barrett had stayed far longer than he probably intended, had put his own life on hold to help her. Of course he would want to move on eventually, to return to bounty hunting or find new purpose elsewhere. "You're leaving," she said, trying to keep her voice neutral. "What? No." Barrett looked startled. "The opposite, actually. I want to stay, permanently, if you'll have me." Violet stared at him. "I don't understand." Barrett turned to face her fully, his expression serious but hopeful. "I'm asking you to marry me, Violet. I know it's fast, I know you're still mourning Thomas, but we work well together. We've built something here, the two of us. You need help running this land, and Sarah deserves a father. I would be good to her, Violet. I would raise her as my own, love her as if she were my blood." "Barrett, I love you," he said, the words tumbling out in a rush. "I've been trying not to, trying to be respectful of your grief and your situation. But I can't help it. I love you and I love Sarah, and I want to spend my life taking care of you both. I'm not trying to replace Thomas. I know I can't, but I can give you a future, a partnership, a family." Violet felt tears sliding down her cheeks. She looked at this man who had saved her life, who had built her a home, who held her daughter with such tenderness. She thought about Thomas, about the life they had planned. And she thought about the life she could have now, the one being offered to her with such honest vulnerability. "I love you too," she whispered. "I think I have for weeks now, but I was afraid to admit it, afraid it was wrong or too soon or disloyal to Thomas's memory." Barrett reached out, cupping her face gently. "It's not wrong. You deserve happiness, Violet. You deserve love." "Then yes," Violet said, smiling through her tears. "Yes, I'll marry you. I want to build a life with you. I want Sarah to have you as a father. I want all of it." Barrett kissed her then, carefully because of the baby between them, but with enough passion to make Violet's heart race. It was her first kiss since Thomas, and it felt like coming home and stepping into the future all at once. They were married 2 weeks later in a simple ceremony at the church in Rhyolite. The whole town turned out, delighted by the romance of the widow and the bounty hunter who had found love in unexpected circumstances. Mrs. Chen cried through the entire ceremony, and even the marshal looked suspiciously misty-eyed. Violet wore a simple blue dress, her best, with wildflowers in her hair. Barrett wore new clothes purchased specially for the occasion, looking uncomfortable but handsome in the formal attire. Sarah, now 6 weeks old, slept peacefully through the vows, wrapped in the blanket Barrett had bought her. The Reverend spoke about new beginnings and the mysterious ways that God brought people together. He spoke about the strength it took to love again after loss, and the courage required to build a family from the ashes of tragedy. When Barrett slipped the ring onto Violet's finger, a simple gold band to replace the one stolen by outlaws, she felt Thomas's blessing somehow. He would have wanted this for her, for their daughter. He would have chosen someone exactly like Barrett to care for them. The reception was held at the hotel, with food and music provided by various townspeople who had grown fond of Violet during her time in Rhyolite. Barrett danced with his new wife, careful of her still recovering body, and later held Sarah while Violet danced with other men from town who wanted to congratulate her. As the evening wound down and they prepared to return home, Mrs. Chen pulled Violet aside. "I am very happy for you," she said, pressing a package into Violet's hands. "You have been through much pain, but you kept fighting. You deserve this happiness." The package contained beautiful silk cloth, enough for a new dress, and Violet hugged the older woman tightly. "Thank you for everything. For helping me when I first arrived, for defending me, for being my friend." "You are good woman," Mrs. Chen said simply. "Good mother. You will be good wife too, I think. Mr. Knox is lucky man." They rode home together under a canopy of stars, Sarah nestled between them. The house was dark but welcoming, their home now in truth as well as name. Barrett lit the lamps while Violet put Sarah down in her cradle, then they stood together in the main room, suddenly shy with each other despite the months of closeness. "I know you need more time," Barrett said quietly. "For your body to heal completely. I'm not expecting, I won't pressure you." Violet kissed him, silencing his nervous rambling. "I know, and I appreciate that. But Barrett, we're married now. This is our life together. We'll figure out the rest as we go." They did figure it out, slowly and carefully, building their physical relationship with the same care they had brought to building the house. Barrett was patient and gentle, always concerned for Violet's comfort, and she loved him more for his consideration. Winter came to Nevada, bringing cold nights and occasional snow. But the house was warm and solid, proof against the weather. Barrett had built a large fireplace in the main room, and they spent evenings there together, Barrett reading aloud while Violet nursed Sarah or worked on mending. The property thrived under their combined efforts. Barrett had purchased chickens and a milk cow with money earned from a quick bounty job in November. He built a proper hen house and a small barn, preparing for spring when they planned to acquire more livestock. The garden had been put to bed for winter, but they had preserved enough vegetables to last until spring planting. Sarah grew rapidly, her personality emerging more each day. She smiled readily, especially at Barrett, and would track him with her eyes whenever he was in the room. Barrett was completely devoted to her, getting up for nighttime feedings even though he couldn't nurse, walking her when she fussed, playing with her for hours. No one looking at them would doubt he was her father in every way that mattered. On Christmas morning, Barrett surprised Violet with a gift, a small wooden box he had carved himself, decorated with intricate flowers. Inside was a photograph of Thomas that Violet had mentioned once existed among his possessions in town. Barrett had tracked it down, had it framed, and now presented it to her. "Sarah should know who her father was," Barrett said. "Should hear stories about him, see his face. I'm honored to raise her, Violet, but I won't let her forget Thomas. He was a good man, and he was part of creating someone very special." Violet cried, overwhelmed by Barrett's generosity and understanding. They placed the photograph on the mantel, where Sarah could see it as she grew. Violet told her daughter stories about Thomas regularly, keeping his memory alive while building new memories with Barrett. Spring arrived with an explosion of wildflowers across the property. Violet planted the garden again, this time with Sarah in a basket beside her, watching with solemn gray eyes. Barrett broke ground for a larger barn and fenced more land for cattle. The ranch Thomas had dreamed of was becoming reality, shaped by different hands than he had planned, but built on the foundation he had laid. One evening in late April, Violet realized her courses were late. She waited another week to be certain, then shared the news with Barrett as they sat on the porch watching Sarah attempt to crawl. "I'm pregnant again," she said, watching his face carefully for his reaction. Barrett's expression transformed, joy and wonder breaking through his usual reserve. "Truly, a baby, truly," Violet confirmed. "Are you happy about it?" Instead of answering, Barrett pulled her into his arms and kissed her thoroughly. Sarah made an indignant sound from her blanket and they broke apart laughing. "I'm more than happy," Barrett said. "I'm honored, overwhelmed. Terrified, all of it." "Me too," Violet admitted. "But we'll manage, we always do." This pregnancy was easier than the first, perhaps because Violet wasn't grieving and traumatized, or perhaps simply because she knew what to expect. Barrett hovered constantly, driving her to distraction with his concern, until she finally banned him from the house during the day unless it was mealtime. Sarah celebrated her first birthday in September with a small party attended by friends from town. She took her first steps that day, lurching from Violet's arms to Barrett's with a look of intense concentration. Barrett caught her and swung her up with a whoop of joy, and Violet captured the moment in her memory, knowing it would be one she treasured forever. The new baby arrived in December, a boy this time, during a rare Nevada snowstorm. Mrs. Patterson made it to the house just in time, and the birth was faster and easier than Sarah's had been. When Mrs. Patterson placed the squalling infant in Barrett's arms, he looked down at his son with an expression of absolute awe. "What should we name him?" Violet asked, exhausted but happy. Barrett looked at her, then at the baby, then at the photograph of Thomas on the mantel. "What do you think about Benjamin? Benjamin Thomas Knox?" Violet felt tears prick her eyes. Benjamin was Barrett's father's name. He had told her that once. Giving their son that name while also honoring Thomas felt exactly right. "It's perfect." Benjamin proved to be a louder, more demanding baby than Sarah had been, but Barrett didn't mind. He walked the floor with his son for hours, singing the same off-key lullabies he had sung to Sarah. The baby seemed to respond to his father's voice, settling more quickly for Barrett than for anyone else. The years passed in a blur of work and family and love. The ranch grew successful, with cattle and horses bringing in steady income. Barrett took occasional bounty jobs when they were local, but he never left for more than a few days, unwilling to be away from his family longer. Sarah grew into a bright, curious child who followed her father everywhere, learning to ride almost before she could walk properly. Benjamin was quieter but no less attached to Barrett, watching everything with solemn eyes and attempting to copy everything his father did. In 1892, Violet gave birth to twin girls, Rose and Ruth, who immediately established themselves as forces of chaos in the Knox household. Barrett, completely outnumbered by females, declared himself the happiest man in Nevada. The house expanded with their family, rooms added as needed, always built by Barrett's careful hands. The property spread to cover several hundred acres, one of the most successful ranches in the area. Barrett hired ranch hands to help with the work, men he trusted who became part of their extended family. On their 10th wedding anniversary, Barrett surprised Violet with a trip to the spot where he had found her in the desert. They rode out together, leaving the children with Mrs. Chen, who still doted on them despite her advancing age. The desert looked different than Violet remembered, or perhaps she was different. The terrified, pregnant widow who had walked these sands barely resembled the confident ranch wife and mother she had become. Barrett helped her down from her horse, and they stood together looking at the vast expanse. "I think about that day sometimes," Barrett said. "About what would have happened if I had ridden a different direction, if I had been an hour later. I would have missed you, would have missed all of this." "But you didn't," Violet said, leaning against his solid warmth. "You found me, you saved me, and then you stayed." "Best decision I ever made," Barrett said, turning her to face him. "Loving you, raising Sarah, building our family, it's everything I never knew I needed." "I love you," Violet said. "More than I can express. You gave me a future when I thought I had none. You gave Sarah a father. You gave me a life beyond anything I dreamed." Barrett kissed her softly. "You gave me those things too, a home, a family, a reason to put down roots and stop running." "We saved each other, Violet." They stayed a little longer, watching the sun set over the mountains, then rode home to their children and their life. The house was bright with lamplight when they arrived, and they could hear laughter from inside. Sarah, now 11, was attempting to teach Benjamin and the twins a card game she had learned in town. Barrett watched through the window for a moment, and Violet saw the contentment on his face. This was everything he had lost when Emily died, everything he had thought was gone forever. And now he had it again, different but no less precious. They stepped inside together, and 4 children immediately clamored for their attention. Barrett scooped up the twins, one in each arm, while Benjamin attached himself to his leg. Sarah hugged Violet, careful not to crush the new baby Violet was expecting in the spring. "Did you have a good anniversary?" Sarah asked. She was old enough now to understand the significance of the day, old enough to know the story of how her parents met. "The best," Violet assured her. "Though I'm happy to be home." "Tell us the story again," Ruth demanded. "About how Papa found you in the desert." "You've heard that story 100 times," Barrett protested, but he was already settling into his favorite chair, children arranging themselves around him. "Once upon a time," Violet began, taking her own seat and smiling at her husband over the heads of their children. "There was a woman alone in the desert who had given up hope. And then a cowboy found her, and everything changed." Barrett's eyes met hers, warm with love and memory, and Violet knew that no matter how many times they told this story, it would never lose its power. It was their story, their beginning, the foundation of everything they had built together. The children listened with rapt attention as Violet recounted the details, with Barrett occasionally interjecting corrections or additions. Outside, the Nevada stars blazed in their familiar patterns. The house was warm and full of love. And Violet Preston Knox, who had once thought her story was ending in the desert, knew with absolute certainty that she had found her happily ever after. The ranch continued to prosper over the years. Sarah grew into a beautiful young woman who could ride as well as any ranch hand and had a sharp mind for business. She helped Violet keep the books and manage the household, preparing for the day when she would run her own home. When she turned 18 in 1893, several young men from surrounding ranches began paying attention, but Sarah seemed in no hurry to settle down. Benjamin grew tall and strong, with his father's quiet competence and his mother's determination. He worked alongside Barrett from dawn to dusk, learning everything about running a ranch. At 16, he was already trusted to handle important tasks independently. The twins, Rose and Ruth, were 12 now and still inseparable despite their different personalities. Rose was quiet and loved helping her mother in the garden, while Ruth was bold and adventurous, frequently getting into trouble. Both adored their father and could usually convince him to let them do things Violet absolutely forbade. The fifth child, a boy they had named William, was 8 and showed signs of becoming the scholar of the family. He preferred books to horses, though Barrett made sure he learned to ride and shoot anyway. "In this country, you need to know how to take care of yourself," Barrett insisted. And then there was the youngest, 5-year-old Grace, who had Barrett completely wrapped around her tiny finger. She was a perfect miniature of Violet, with the same determination and the same ability to find silver linings in any situation. The old photograph of Thomas still held pride of place on the mantel. Sarah knew the stories of her birth father and spoke of him fondly, but Barrett was her papa, the man who had raised her and loved her without reservation. It was a testament to Barrett's generosity and wisdom that Sarah had been allowed to love both men without conflict. On a bright morning in May 1895, Violet stood on the porch watching her family. Barrett was teaching William and Grace to ride together, patient even when William fell off for the 3rd time. Sarah was helping Benjamin repair a fence, the 2 oldest children working with the easy coordination of people who knew each other's thoughts. The twins were supposed to be feeding chickens, but were actually having a conversation with the birds, giving each one a name and elaborate backstory. Mrs. Chen, now quite elderly but still sharp as ever, had come out from town for a visit. She sat beside Violet on the porch, watching the scene with approval. "You have built good life," Mrs. Chen said. "Strong family, I am proud of you." "I couldn't have done it without so many people helping," Violet said. "Especially you. You were the first person to show me kindness when I arrived." "You were worth kindness," Mrs. Chen said simply. "You had strength inside, I saw it. Mr. Knox saw it too, that is why he stayed." "I'm grateful every day that he did," Violet said. "Some people only get one chance at love, I got 2. "Some people deserve 2 chances," Mrs. Chen corrected. "You faced darkness and chose light. You survived when others would have quit. This is reward for courage." Violet squeezed the older woman's hand, grateful for the friendship that had sustained her through so many years. Mrs. Chen had become like a mother to her, filling the void left by her own mother's death. Barrett rode up to the porch, swinging Grace down from his saddle while William followed more carefully on his own horse. "I think we've got a natural rider here," Barrett said, ruffling Grace's hair. "She's fearless." "She gets that from you," Violet said, smiling. "From both of us," Barrett corrected, leaning down to kiss his wife. Even after all these years, his kisses still made her heart race. That evening, after the children were in bed and the house was quiet, Barrett and Violet sat together on the porch as they had countless times before. The stars were brilliant overhead, and the sound of the creek provided gentle background music. "What are you thinking about?" Barrett asked, his arm around Violet's shoulders. "About how far we've come," Violet said. "About that terrified woman walking through the desert, sure she was going to die. She would never have believed this could be her future. 6 children, a successful ranch, a husband who loves her. It seems impossible." "Nothing's impossible with enough determination," Barrett said. "You proved that when you kept walking instead of lying down to die. You fought for your life and for Sarah's life. Everything else just built on that foundation." "We built it together," Violet said. I had the determination, but you had the skill and the knowledge, and the love. You loved me when I wasn't ready to be loved, and you waited until I was." Barrett pulled her closer. "I'd wait forever for you, but I'm glad I didn't have to." They sat in comfortable silence, two people who had found each other against all odds and built something beautiful together. The house behind them held their children, their future. The land around them held their past, their struggles, their triumphs. "You ever miss it?" Violet asked. "The bounty hunting, the traveling, the excitement?" "Never," Barrett said without hesitation. "This is all the excitement I need. Watching our children grow, working the land, building something that will last beyond us. This is the life I always wanted but never thought I could have again." "I wish Thomas could see Sarah now," Violet said softly. "Could see what a wonderful person she's becoming. I think he would be proud." "I think he would be proud of you," Barrett said, "for surviving, for raising her, for building this life. And I think he would approve of us, of this family we've made." "I believe so too," Violet said. She had long since made peace with loving two men, with honoring Thomas's memory while building a future with Barrett. There was no conflict there, only gratitude for the love she had been fortunate enough to experience twice. As the years continued to pass, the ranch became legendary in the area. The Knox family was known for their integrity, their hard work, and their fierce loyalty to each other. Barrett never fully gave up bounty hunting, but he was selective about the jobs he took, only going after the truly dangerous criminals and never leaving his family for long. Sarah eventually married a young rancher named James Fletcher from a neighboring property. Barrett walked her down the aisle with tears in his eyes, remembering the tiny infant he had held on the night of her birth. The wedding was the social event of the season in Rhyolite, with seemingly everyone in town attending. Benjamin took over more of the ranch operations as Barrett aged, proving himself more than capable of handling the responsibility. The twins grew into capable young women, Rose eventually marrying, and Ruth becoming a teacher at the schoolhouse in town. William pursued his education, eventually becoming a lawyer and bringing his legal expertise back to Rhyolite. And Grace, the baby, grew into a spirited young woman who could ride and rope as well as any man. Through it all, Barrett and Violet remained the center of their family, the foundation upon which everything else was built. They grew old together, silver threading through their hair, lines deepening around their eyes. But their love never diminished, never faded into comfortable complacency. They still sat together on the porch watching sunsets. Barrett still looked at Violet with the same intensity he had that day in the desert, and Violet still felt her heart skip when he walked into a room. In 1910, on a warm spring evening, they celebrated their 35th wedding anniversary surrounded by children, grandchildren, and friends. The house they had built together now rang with the laughter of the next generation. Sarah's children played with Benjamin's, while the younger Knox siblings watched with indulgent smiles. The marshal, now retired and elderly, raised a glass in toast to Barrett and Violet Knox, who proved that love can bloom even in the harshest conditions, who built a family and a legacy that will endure for generations. May we all be so fortunate. Everyone drank to the toast, and Violet found herself crying happy tears. She looked at Barrett, her partner, her love, her best friend, and saw the same emotion reflected in his eyes. Later, after everyone had gone home and the house was quiet, they walked together to the creek, to the spot where they had first talked about their pasts and their fears. The moon was full, painting everything in silver light. "You remember," Violet said, "when you told me about Emily. About losing her and thinking you would never have this kind of life again." "I remember," Barrett said. "I was so angry at the world, so convinced that happiness was something that happened to other people. I felt the same way, Violet said. After Thomas died after the attack, I thought my story was over, that I would just be surviving, not living. And instead we found each other, Barrett said. Found this. He gestured to encompass the ranch, the house, the life they had created. The best things often come from the worst circumstances, Violet said. I wouldn't have been in that desert if Thomas hadn't died. You wouldn't have been there if you hadn't been tracking criminals. We never would have met under normal circumstances. Then I'm grateful for the path that led us to each other, Barrett said. Even though parts of it were painful, even though we both lost people we loved, because it brought us here to this moment, to this life. He kissed her, slow and sweet, and Violet felt the same flutter of happiness she had felt at 19, at 22, at every age in between. Love, she had learned, didn't diminish with time. It deepened, changed, grew richer and more complex. They walked back to the house hand in hand, their home lit from within by lamplight. Through the windows, they could see the photographs on the mantel, Thomas, young and hopeful, frozen in time. Barrett and Violet on their wedding day, surrounded by friends, their children at various ages. Their grandchildren, the newest generation of the family they had built. I want you to know, Barrett said as they reached the porch, that every day with you has been a gift. Every moment, every challenge, every joy. I love you more now than I did when I married you, and I loved you then enough to last a lifetime. We've had a lifetime, Violet said, smiling through fresh tears. And if I could choose to live it all again, I wouldn't change a single thing. Well, except maybe the part where I almost died in the desert. That was unpleasant. Barrett laughed, the sound warm and familiar. I don't know. If you hadn't almost died in the desert, I wouldn't have found you, so maybe even that was necessary. Then I'm grateful for all of it, Violet said. For the pain that brought us together and the love that kept us together. For the family we created and the life we built. For every sunrise we watched together and every challenge we overcame. All of it. Every moment. They stood together on the porch of the house that had started as Thomas's dream and become their reality. The Nevada stars blazed overhead, constant and eternal. The land stretched away in all directions, peaceful and productive. And inside, the evidence of their love slept soundly. Children and grandchildren who would carry their legacy forward into the future. Violet Preston Knox, who had once thought her story was ending in the desert, had instead found a new beginning. She had found love twice, had survived impossible circumstances, had built a family and a life beyond her wildest dreams. And standing beside her husband of 35 years, looking at the home they had created together, she knew with absolute certainty that her story had been worth every difficult moment. Because this, all of this, was her happily ever after. And it was more beautiful than any fairy tale could ever be.